Absolute honour. I will stand up. It was an absolute honour to be invited, and I was going to start anyway by just saying a big thank you to the organisers, so Suzanne and Pamela. I'm delighted to be here, and that introduction was extremely generous. So I'm not joking when I say lower your expectations a little bit. Okay, so I have timed this, so I'm going to hopefully stay within time. Right, so the topic of my talk today is sexual violence against war captives in ancient Greece, and I will just say at the outset that I am looking specifically at sexual violence against war captive women. So in our ancient sources, it is usually women who are portrayed as the victims of wartime rape, and hence my focus on their experiences rather than the experiences of male war captives. Okay, so there are two things I want to try to do with this paper. So the first is to elucidate the experiences of war captive women in ancient Greece. Our ancient sources are predominantly male-authored and male-centered, and often the experiences of these women can go overlooked. So I'm going to attempt to reconstruct what that process of capture and enslavement looks like from the perspective of the women involved. And the second thing I hope I will be able to do is to offer an explanation of why sexual violence is such a prominent feature of ancient Greek warfare. Because it was a very prominent feature of ancient warfare, as the examples we will look at today will demonstrate. So I'll begin very briefly by just discussing the two-phase pattern of warfare that we see in ancient literature. So the scholar Kassandra has identified a two-phase pattern of warfare that recurs throughout multiple different genres of Greek literature. So the first phase involves killing the men, and the second phase involves enslaving the women and children. So when a city is sacked, the men and boys of military age are killed, and the surviving community of non-combatants are rounded up and enslaved. Those not wanted as slaves, such as the very old and the very young, may be killed or disposed of. So Gotcha refers to this process of rounding up and sorting through the captured population of non-combatants as andronicization. By the end of this process of sorting and selecting, most of the captives would be women and girls. These women and girls would be subjected to acts of sexual violence both during the sack of the city as part of this process of andronicization, and in both the immediate and long-term aftermath of the sack, as they would be kept as concubines by their captors or sold into slavery to others who could then sexually exploit them. Okay, just very quickly to demonstrate that this is indeed a very common pattern, I've given you just some examples from different genres of literature. So we see this pattern in poetic accounts of mythological wars, such as in Homer's Iliad and Euripides' Phoenician women. So in the Iliad, we're told that when a city is captured, the men are slaughtered, fire raises the city, and other men carry away the children and the girl women. Euripides' Phoenician women tells the story of the battle between the two sons of Oedipus for the kingship of Thebes. In this passage, Jocasta warns her son Eteocles that if his brother Polynices wins, that he will see Argive spears take the Theban shaft, and the city of Thebes will be laid low, and he will see many girls as prisoners forcibly taken by enemy soldiers. We see it too in prose accounts of historical wars, so such as in Herodotus' histories and Thucydides' histories. So the first passage is Herodotus on the destruction of Miletus. So he says most of the male population was killed by the Persians, their women and children were reduced to slavery. The two passages from Thucydides then, the first one is on the Athenian destruction of Scione, so they put to death the men of military age, made slaves of women. And finally then on the Athenian destruction of Milos, they put to death all the men of military age and sold women and children as slaves. Okay, so I think I've made that point then, that this is a very common pattern. We also can perhaps identify it in art and iconography as well. So this is a 5th century vase painting depicting the sack of Troy. And so we can see there is a Greek soldier in the middle standing over the body of a dead Trojan soldier. And he is about to drag away the women who are carrying around the statue of Athena. So this figure is, of course, Ajax the Lesser, and the woman here is Kassandra. So we'll discuss this a little more in a few minutes, but just to really make that point, two-phase pattern of warfare, kill men, slave women. All right, so moving on to the experiences of the women themselves. So what does this process of capture and enslavement look like for the women involved? So while there are very many references to the capture of women in war, most of these references are very brief, and often they overlook the perspective of the women themselves. So for example, every time Thucydides describes the sack of a city in his histories, he tacks on the phrase on the women and children were enslaved onto the end of his narrative. So there are the examples we see here: the women were made slaves, the women who got captured were sold as slaves. And Herodotus isn't much better, so their women and children were reduced to slavery. So this is usually all we ever hear about these women in these sources. So they're not individualized, they're not named, and we don't ever get any insight into their feelings or their perspectives or their experiences. So this is true even in texts where captive women play a more prominent role in the plot. So for example, Homer's Iliad. The catalyst for the plot of the Iliad is, of course, Agamemnon's seizure of Achilles' war captive, Briseis. Yet despite her significance to the story, we almost never hear from Briseis herself. She speaks only a few lines in a single passage in the entire epic. So the focus remains on Achilles and his feelings, as the passages there demonstrated. So Agamemnon has dishonored me, he has taken my prize with his own hands. Briseis is only one of many women present in the Iliad, and she is the only one who ever speaks. I'm pretty sure she's the only one who ever speaks. So the rest of them remain silent, and the majority of them, again, are not even named. So this elision of the female experience in our ancient sources leads Goethe to comment that heterosexual practices of sexual violence in ancient warfare hardly register in our historical consciousness, just like the countless victims themselves, who are mainly nameless and faceless to us. So this idea that it hardly registers in our historical consciousness. I'm just going to take a quick sip of water. So I think part of what can make it easy to overlook the experiences of women is the language which ancient authors used to describe their sexual enslavement. So the language tends to be quite neutral and euphemistic, as the examples here demonstrate. So for example, in both Homer's Iliad, the top passage, and Herodotus' history, the bottom passage, the verb megnumi is frequently used to describe the rape of war captives. So megnumi, I think, literally means something like to mix or mingle, and so has the sense to have intercourse with someone. But there isn't anything inherently violent in the term itself. So in the first passage, one of the Greek soldiers asks Agamemnon what he wants this time. Is it some young woman so you can twine in love with her, and keep her secluded all for yourself? The young woman in question would be a captive woman and was forced into this relationship, but the language doesn't quite capture the violence inherent in that situation. The same with Herodotus down here, talking about the Ethiopian women. And so some women were raped successively by so many Persian soldiers that they died. Now the translator has translated it as rape, but the Greek term is actually just megnumi. So there's no mention of biat in this passage. It is the context that clearly demonstrates the violent and non-consensual nature of this. Moreover, very frequently the language used is language that is specifically associated with marriage. So words like gamos, marriage, lumpe, bride, and damar, wife. These are just a small selection of examples from Greek tragedy. So the first three all come from Euripides' Trojan Women, which tells the story of the fate of the captive women after Troy falls. In the first passage, the Greek herald Talthybius tells Hecuba that Agamemnon has decided to take her daughter Kassandra, the virgin priestess of Apollo, as his concubine. So Agamemnon will abandon piety and the wish of the god, and then her by force in an unlawful marriage. So here we do have a mixture of both language of marriage, but also Bia is there as well to really emphasize that this is a transgression. And the second passage is Andromache speaking about her sexual enslavement to Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. So when I was captured, the son of Achilles wanted to take me as his wife, as his damnar. I shall be a slave in the house of a murderer. The next passage is again Andromache. She begged Neoptolemus not to take Hector's shield to the hearth of Peleus, or to that same bedroom where she will be his bride. In Sophocles' Ajax, Tecmessa, who is Ajax's captive woman, is referred to as his nymphe, as his bride. And in Sophocles' Women of Trachis, the captive princess Iole is repeatedly referred to as being both the bride, the nymphe, and the wife, the damnar of Heracles. So just to be clear, these men don't intend to formally marry their captives. Many of them already have legitimate wives and at home. So I don't think the use of marital language is meant to imply formal legal marriage. And what it does do is it emphasizes the sexual nature of these women's enslavement. And again, obviously there is nothing inherently violent about this language. And in fact, for us in the modern world, where marriages are hopefully based on mutual affection and consent, such language may even carry connotations of romance and desire. And so this language has the potential then to disguise the violence inherent in the situation. Now the conflation of marriage and enslaved concubinage is a huge part of how captive women are portrayed in our ancient sources, not just in the literary sources, but also in art and iconography. So this image here shows Agamemnon leading away the captive woman Briseis. And the gestures on the vase are often associated with marriage, so she veiled like a bride, and he's gripping her by the wrist as he leads her. So we see that quite a lot in images of marriage. How many time? So considering the fact then that captive women are often overlooked in the ancient sources, and the fact that when they are mentioned, the language used is often ambiguous, how can we go about uncovering and accessing their experiences and perspectives? So first, we must be keenly aware that the dominant male perspective enshrined in our sources does not represent the perspective of everyone in the ancient world. And secondly, we must, as Hunter Gardner puts it, listen carefully for the muted but still audible voices of peripheral and marginalized groups. There is one source that I think is particularly useful when it comes to studying the lives of war captive women, and that is Greek tragedy. Now, of course, tragedy is still a male-authored source that was performed by men, probably for an audience mostly made up of men. But I still think it goes further than our other sources does in trying to imagine what that experience was like for the women. So it is the only genre of ancient Greek literature in which captive women appear as major characters and speak at length about their experiences. And so I will be drawing a lot on tragedy in the analysis that follows. So finally, going to answer my question, what does the process of capture and enslavement look like from the point of view of the women? So after the men are killed, the process of rounding up the women begins. And so a short passage from Book 8 of the Odyssey reveals what this process might have looked like. Odysseus is compared to a captive woman weeping over the body of her dead husband. He wept as a woman weeps when she throws her arms around the body of her beloved husband, fallen in battle in defense of his city and his comrades. She clings to him, wailing and lamenting. But the enemy come up and beat her back and shoulders with spears as they lead her off into slavery and a life of miserable toil, with her cheeks wasted by our pitiable grief. So we're told that these soldiers used the blunt end of their spears as weapons with which they beat the women into submission so that they can lead them off as slaves. And so the terms used for captive women in epic and tragedy are iconolotus and doriolotus, which means captive with the spear. So Goethe links these terms directly to the use of spears as weapons to subdue captives. The other thing this passage gives us an impression of is the emotional state the women are already in before they are captured. So they are shocked and grieving the deaths of their husbands, sons, brothers, and fathers. So a significant part of the physical subduing of women involves ripping off their clothes and dragging them around by their hair. So this is a very common image in Greek literature and art. The first example here is from Aeschylus' Seven Against Thebes, where the chorus of Theban women describe the sack of the city and how the women are taken captive and led away, young and old together, dragged by their hair like horses, their clothes being torn off. And the second passage is from Euripides' Iphigenia at Aulus, where the Trojan women imagine their future enslavement. So who will it be that strains to drag me by the fine tresses of my hair as I shed tears, and who will put me as the fire from my fatherland in its destruction? So just two more examples. The first passage is Andromache, recalling how she was taken as a slave to the Argive ships, dragged by her hair. And the final passage is from Aeschylus' Suppliants, in which the Egyptians try to drag the Danaids off as captives, telling them that if they don't board the ship, they will have their hair ripped out. They warn them that dragging shows no reverence whatsoever for the hair, emphasizing the pain such an action inflicts. Summerstein, just going back, to this passage where they mentioned that their clothes are being torn off. So Alan Summerstein comments that their clothes would naturally be pulled off as the women struggle against their captors, which is of course true, but I also think it might be a little bit more deliberate than that, if the men are purposefully removing the women's clothes. So we do have this passage from Athenaeus that is quoting a fragment from Book 4 of Purchas's Lives, which describes how Tarentine forces in Carbina rounded up the women and children and raped them. The Carbinian captives are deliberately exposed, naked, and stripped as part of the sexual violence that is inflicted upon them. So they've exposed them naked by day for all who chose to come and look at them, so that whoever pleased, leaping as it were on this unfortunate band, might satiate his appetite with the beauty of those who were there assembled. And so I will return to the significance of this action of stripping in a moment, but first just to point out that dragging by the hair is also a very common image in iconography. So we're back to this image of Ajax the Lesser reaching out to grip Kassandra by her hair to drag her away. And Kassandra is nude, and this full frontal nudity is unusual, I think, for women in vase paintings. And so it stands out to us, and Anderson suggests that her nudity may indicate Ajax's intention of sexual assault. The next two images again show Ajax dragging away Kassandra by the hair, employing the exact same gesture as in the Theophrades painting, so reaching out with his hand to drag her away. And once again, you can note that Kassandra's clothes appear to be falling off of her. The painting on the left is the same thing, once again, Ajax and Kassandra. And the sculpture on the right is part of the pedimental sculpture from the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, which depicts the battle between the centaurs and the Lapids. So the centaurs get drunk at a wedding feast and assault the Lapid women. And what we see here is the hand of a centaur gripping the hair of a Lapid woman as he attempts to carry her off. Okay, so you will have noticed that most of these images show Ajax and Kassandra, and I'm actively looking for images of other captive women being dragged away in the same way. So one of my colleagues pointed me towards some images of the Amazons, but generally I find it quite difficult to find images, so if anyone has any suggestions, that would be greatly appreciated. And these images of Ajax and Kassandra are so common that they come to be parodied. So this is a fragment of an Italian red figure crater, and it depicts Kassandra dragging Ajax away by the crest of his helmet. And so this it demonstrates certainly how popular is the right word, but how common these images of Ajax and Kassandra were in the ancient world. And if I can find some other vase paintings of other women, I would argue that it would also demonstrate, how common this motif of dragging a woman by her hair is. So, to come back to the significance of the gesture of removing women's clothing and dragging a woman by her hair, there are three things I want to emphasize. So first, dragging by the hair is physically very painful. Second, dragging by the hair is dehumanizing. So this is emphasized by the comparison made to horses. I think in that passage, I'm not going to go all the way back, but the first passage by Aeschylus, the women dragged by their hair are compared to horses being led by their manes. And third, in the cultural context of ancient Greece and classical Athens in particular, dragging by the hair is a deeply violating act intended to induce shame in the victim. Most women in ancient Greece veiled, and the veil functioned as a mark of status and respectability. In order to drag a woman by her hair, her veil must first be removed. And for a man to tear the veil of a woman is a deliberate act of disrespect and dishonor. And we think, we're not entirely sure, but it's likely that only free women wore a veil, and while enslaved women did not. And if this is correct, then removing a woman's veil is a clear way of marking her out as a slave. Moreover, in ancient Greece, notions of female respectability were inextricably linked to sexual behavior. The veil marks the woman as chaste and sexually available only to her husband, while unveiled slaves were deemed more widely available. And so that's the passage I've taken from Llewellyn Jones' book on veiling in the ancient world, where he explains that in a bit more detail. So thus, tearing the veil of a woman opens her up to sexual exploitation and is a precursor to the sexual violence she will experience in captivity. The violence inherent in this act of unveiling is emphasized by the metaphorical phrase breaking the credinon. So credinon is the most common Greek term for veil, and breaking the credinon is a phrase used to refer both to ripping the veil of a woman and to breaching the defensive walls of the city. So it is an inherently violent image, and it is also an image that highlights the centrality of sexual violence to ancient Greek warfare, as it directly associates the destruction of a city to the rape of its women. I might speed through a couple of these slides. So I had mentioned earlier the next stage of enslavement, and that the population whom their captors didn't deem valuable might be disposed of. So usually this would be the very old and very young. So the image here shows the elderly King Prime being bludgeoned to death with the body of his grandson Astyanax. And the passage here, again from Aeschylus' 7 against Thebes, describes how infants are ripped from the breast of their mother. So that bloody screams rise up from infants fresh from the nourishing breast. So in African tragedy, it's especially male children who tend to be killed, lest they seek revenge when they grow up. And to this end, pregnant women may also be killed, which is perhaps suggested by Agamemnon's comment in Iliad 6, where he says that even the boys still in their mother's wombs must be destroyed. So once the women have been captured and rounded up, they are then doled out to various soldiers as gera, or prizes of honor. So Achilles sums up this process in the Iliad, in the first passage here. He says, "We had gone to feed Aegean's sacred city, we sacked it and brought all the spoils here. The sons of the Achaeans made proper division of all the rest among themselves, and chose for the son of Atreus as his gift of honor the beautiful Briseis." So the Iliad presents us with the awarding of women to soldiers, and from a male perspective. Achilles is concerned with the proper division of spoils because these spoils, which include captive women, function as symbols of honor a soldier has won in battle. And it is important to the male community of soldiers that each man gets his fair share. Tragedy, however, presents us with the division of spoils from the perspective of the women themselves. Rather than concerns over honour and fair shares, we see the fear and anxiety of the women as they face an uncertain future, waiting to hear which soldier they have been opting to. So the passage on the left comes from Ripley's Trojan Women, and so it's part of a conversation between the chorus of ordinary women and the Trojan Queen Hecuba. The chorus asks, "To whom have I been allocated the elected slave? Oh, which Argive, which Pythian or Islander will lead my unhappy self away from Troy to his land?" As well as their fear and anxiety, their grief is also palpable. Each woman is allotted to a different soldier and will be taken off to his home. So this means that each woman will end up in a different part of the Greek world, and they are unlikely ever to see each other again. And the community of survivors is broken up and dispersed. And in the passage on the right, Hecuba laments that she will never see her daughters again, nor they her. So these are just two more passages where women are lamenting that breakup of family and community groups. The one on the right in particular describes how children cling to their mother's necks as they are taken away from them to be led into a life of slavery. Mother, alas, be came to taking you off from this sight all alone onto a dark ship with oars that skim the sea. So this is all, of course, deeply traumatic for the women and girls involved. And we do see this traumatic nature of this recognised in tragedy. So the passage on the left describes how a captive woman fainted from her grief as the enemy ship carried her away from her homeland. And the passage on the right is from Sophocles' Women of Trachis. It describes how the captive princess Iole is so traumatised that she cannot speak. So we're told that you won't get very much out of her. Ever since she left her own country, she hasn't uttered a single word. She has been misery over her wretched lot, endlessly crying her eyes out. Finally, then, once the women are enslaved, what does their life look like? Well, their duties are summed up quite neatly by Agamemnon in Iliad Book 1, so in the first passage, where he says that the captive Briseis will work at the loom and serve his bed. So captive women perform two main types of labour, so menial domestic labour, such as weaving and fetching water, and sexual labour. So many of them are kept specifically as concubines, forced to sleep with their enslavers and bear them children. I'm very conscious of time. Do I have time to keep going? Okay. So then, so why do men take women captive during war? So when trying to figure this out, I turned to modern theories of wartime sexual violence. So I won't give you a literature review of all of that theory, but a couple of points. For a long time, there was a lack of consensus on the causal factors of sexual violence in war, with scholars emphasizing either one of two things, so agency or structure. So agency focuses on individual motives of the perpetrator and considers things like biological urges and sexual psychology. Structure focuses on social and environmental factors and emphasizes relationships of power and dominance. So today it is increasingly recognized that it's not necessarily an either-or situation between these two groups of agency versus structure. Multiple causes can be in play at any one time. In 1998, the sociologist Laurie Heiss put forward an ecological model of violence that takes into account both the agency of the perpetrator in deciding to commit an act of violence and the social and environmental factors that facilitate and enable that violence to happen. So this ecological model has been widely adopted and is used today in a lot of public health research, such as that conducted by the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the Center for Disease Control. One version of this ecological model is Clarke's multi-level and multi-causal analysis of wartime rape. So Clarke adopts the ecological model specifically to the situation of wartime sexual violence. And she envisions sexual violence as arising from factors operating on three different levels: the societal or macro level, the group or meso level, and the individual or micro level. So on the societal level, sexual violence is facilitated by patriarchal social structures where women occupy a subordinate position to men in society. So in such patriarchal societies, Clark says, it is the social construction of sex as a power relationship based on dominance and submission, which explains why a man's sexual needs take precedence over a woman's right to say no. So another scholar of wartime rape, Mary, agrees that sexual violence is made possible by the existence of certain structures and ideas which make it thinkable and even palatable to commit violence against women. On the Greek level, which Clark argues is the most important in the context of war, sexual violence occurs ultimately because it is immensely useful to the armed group and is able to serve a multitude of military and strategic purposes, such as destroying an enemy's morale, reinforcing and strengthening the cohesiveness of the perpetrator group, and serving as a form of revenge on and punishment of the enemy group. And on the individual level then, sexual violence occurs because the perpetrator actively decides to carry it out for whatever personal reasons, and which may include sexual desire. And Clark emphasizes the importance of recognizing how all of these three levels interact with each other. So it doesn't have to be an either-or situation. And I think that we can see these different levels in operation in our ancient sources. So sexual desire, which is classed as an individual emotion, is clearly portrayed as a factor in choosing a prize woman in both epic and tragedy. So on the left, in Sophocles' Trachinia, we are told that Heracles seized the princess Iole due to Eros. And similarly, in Euripides' Trojan Women, we are told that Agamemnon chose Kassandra as his prize, again due to Eros. And yes, just to point out that there has been some interesting research done by Jonathan Gospel, as well as Susan Lynch and Carrie looking at taking approaches from evolutionary psychology and applying them to the issues of wartime rape in the ancient world. Okay, so then the individual decision to commit an act of sexual violence can be facilitated by factors on the societal level, such as patriarchal social structures and ideologies about sex and gender, in which a man's sexual needs and urges take precedence over a woman's unwillingness. So we did see this view expressed at several points in the Iliad. For example, in the second passage, this is Thetis talking to Achilles, and she advises him that it is a good thing to join with a woman in love, even though given the context, the woman in question would be a coerced war captive. And similarly, in the first passage, which is Agamemnon saying that he swears an oath that he never slept with Briseis, as is the way of mankind between men and women. So the suggestion is it would be natural and normal for him to sleep with Briseis, to rape her. She's a war captive, he doesn't get a choice in this. The view expressed in Trojan Women, so this one here, that a single night breaks down a woman's distaste for a man's bed, draws on patriarchal Greek stereotypes of women as lecherous and always desirous of sex. Such stereotypes downplay the harm rape does and normalize sexual violence by naturalizing it. Do tell me if I need to stop. Stay? Okay. So, as well as an expression of power over women, sexual violence can also be a display of dominance over other men. So in the Iliad, Agamemnon seizes Briseis, not because he desires her, but so that Achilles can fully realize how much Agamemnon is his superior. In patriarchal societies like ancient Greece, rape was perceived as a property crime against a woman's male guardian, more so than the woman herself. And often the victim was perceived as being the humiliated and emasculated male. So that is a quote from Mary. In the context of war, rape can become an assault not against an individual woman, but against her entire community. So men are humiliated and emasculated, to use Mary's words, because failure to protect their women from the enemy and to control their sexual appropriative powers is perceived as a critical symptom of weakness in men. I think we can see this attitude in the Iliad, implicit in the Trojans' concern with protecting their women, and the way Hector in particular uses his defense of the women as a boast of his martial prowess. So he taunts the dying Patroclus, and I think I didn't actually put this on the slide, so I apologize, but he says to the dying Patroclus, "You must have thought that you would sack our city and take the day of freedom from the women of Troy and carry them off in your ships to your own native land. Poor fool, in their defense Hector's swift horses speed into battle, and I am renowned for my spear among all the war-loving Trojans. for keeping the day of compulsion from them. And of course, this is a major reason why men take women captive during war and keep them as prizes, as geras, prize of honor. So as prizes, these women literally symbolize the defeat of their men. Okay, so on the Greek level then, which is the level that Clarke argues is the most important in the context of war, sexual violence occurs because it is immensely useful to the army in achieving its aim of destroying the enemy. So Clarke mentions 3 specific ways it does this. First, it can destroy an enemy's morale. So I think we see this in Aeschylus' 7 against Thebes, when Eteocles worries that the women's fear of sexual enslavement will spread to the male warriors with detrimental effect. And we see it also in the Iliad. So in Book 10, we're told that the Trojan allies are able to sleep soundly at night because they don't have their women and children nearby. The Trojans themselves, however, remain awake and keep watch out of anxiety over the potential capture of their women and children. And in Book 20, so this passage here, and this is Achilles meets Aeneas on the battlefield, and he literally taunts Aeneas with the capture of the women of Nessus. I came after you and sacked the town and took the day of freedom from the women I carried away captive. Okay. So second, then, sexual violence, according to Clarke, can reinforce and strengthen the cohesiveness of the perpetrator group. So at several points in the Iliad, we see Agamemnon encouraging his men to fight harder by promising them captive women who will share their beds. Moreover, several scholars argue that the process of acquiring and redistributing captive women and other plunder is an essential way in which the social order of the army is maintained. So Donlan states that acquiring and distributing booty is a unifying mechanism, for it structures the political hierarchy, creates or affirms leaders, and validates the dominant ideology of strength, courage, warcraft, and personal glory. Finally, then, according to Clarke, sexual violence serves as a form of revenge on and punishment of the perpetrator group. So in Book 2 of the Iliad, Nestor posits the mass rape of Trojan women as revenge for the theft of Helen. And this view that the rape of the Trojan women is revenge for Helen is common in tragedy as well. And we could maybe also consider the opening of Herodotus' histories with the list of the tit-for-tat abductions of women. And I am coming to the end now. But beyond these reasons, sexual violence is a useful tool for the armed group in its aim of destroying the enemy, because it literally results in the disruption of the enemy group's bloodline. This passage is from Trojan Women, and in it the chorus described the fall of Troy and the rape of the women. The Trojans were slaughtered at their altars, heads hacked off, widowed the young women in their beds, and brought to Greece a garland of victory in the children they bore it, but sorrow to the native land of the Phrygians. These women and the children their rape results in represents the ultimate victory of the Greeks and sorrow for the Phrygians. And the children the women bear are a Stephanos, a crown of victory for the conquerors. So in patriarchal societies, children are the properties of their father, and they perpetuate his bloodline and his culture rather than those of their mothers. Thus, the children born from the rape of the Trojan women are coded as Greek rather than Trojan, and the rape of the Trojan women literally interrupts Trojan bloodlines, as these Greek children replace the Trojan children, who are either killed like the male children like Bastianus, or enslaved themselves. So earlier I mentioned the breakup and dispersal of the community of survivors, as they are all allotted to different soldiers and taken off to different parts of the world, never to see each other again. This dispersal results in a loss of group identity, collective memory, and cultural heritage. The women have no way of coming together to share memories or to continue the traditions and customs of their people. The birth of Greek children compounds this destruction. It marks the end of Trojan culture and the ultimate victory of the Greeks. And so sexual violence, therefore, functions as a tool that can be used to destroy an enemy group. And we can understand it as a weapon of war. And this is the very last slide I have. So I thought it might be a nice place to end, is with a passage from Pat Barker's retelling of the Trojan War from the perspective of Briseis and the silence of the girls. So in this passage, the captive Trojan women resist the destruction of culture and preserve their captive memory by handing down Trojan songs to the Greek soldiers, to the Greek children, and whose fathers are Greek soldiers. So Briseis listens to Tecmessa sing her son a lullaby, and she says that decades after the last man who fought at Troy is dead, their sons will remember the songs their Trojan brothers sang to them, and this is how their people will survive. So I'm going to leave it there, and I do apologize if I can't be over time.
Could you put up the Kassandra Wallace slide, the original one,
The original
for my
one.
background? That'd be great.
There.
That's it, that'd be great. Perfect. So the figure of Kassandra, I don't know where I first came across her, but I know she's interested me since middle school, when I wrote a terrible thriller called Believe in Kassandra. I circulated chapters among my friends. Thankfully, it is now lost. With free computers. I typed it up on my dad's Sears Roebuck electronic typewriter, hunting and pecking. But from 2019 to 2021, I worked obsessively on a hybrid verse novel, Exit Kassandra, researching extant texts, consulting work in critical rape and literary trauma theory, sending it first questions and later the final manuscript to Professor Emeritus of Ancient Classics at Maynooth University, David Scourfield, and Associate Professor of Classics at Tulane University, Thomas D. Frizzell, previously my Latin instructor when I was an undergraduate at UCLA. Both professors have my abundant gratitude, and I promise, if anybody can help me get to Dublin, I promise David some pints in recompense for his assistance. My intent throughout this project was to represent Kassandra not as a mad prophetess, which narratively I was convinced she wouldn't be after the defeat of Troy and her experience of rape, but instead as a victim of multiple traumas. The manuscript was also read in full by a number of poets. You may be familiar with the work of Fiona Benson, who's powerfully engaged with sexualized violence in the classics in her own poetry. This manuscript I'm going to read from is unpublished, but a selection is forthcoming in Emily Hauser and Helena Taylor's Women Recreating Classics, Contemporary Voices from Bloomsbury. Given the nature of this work, I didn't feel like, because it uses, it's a hybrid, it uses script, it uses prose, it uses verse. It didn't feel like a fit for my usual poetry publisher. And so I tried some others. After a few rejections, including a letter I'm tempted to frame, to ask me about over wine, I shelved the work for the time being in 2021. So if any of my pronunciations are a little, I was au fait with everything when I was in the thick of this. But since then I've had to turn to this project, and also I was at Boston University for 18 years, and I've only been at Bristol the past 2, and so that's been quite the transition. So in the extract that follows, roughly the first half of this manuscript, some passages appear in regular free verse, the dreams are all in prose, and some passages, especially but not exclusively those involving gods, in script, because you know how theatrical the gods are. There are also some occasional epigraphs at the bottom. They're in the bottom right pages, kind of down here in the corner in italics. They're all identified in the back, of course. And derived in this reading from Maurice Blanchot's The Writing of the Disaster, translated by Anne Smock. Sappho, as translated by Anne Carson in If Not Winter. Paul Celan's Break the Turn in Timestead, the collected later poetry, translated by Pierre Joris. And Aeschylus's Agamemnon in Ted Hughes's version. I'll do my best to modulate my voice accordingly to suggest different shifts, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards to clarify. If anything in my interpretation of this narrative jars or you think that would usefully inform it, please come find me at Bristol. My email's everywhere. I'd be really happy to hear your suggestions for developing this further. So what I'm going to do is, rather than explain to you how my work aims to redress sexualized violence, I'm going to try to show you the reading. You'll be glad to know it's under 30 pages and there's a lot of white space. So thank you in advance for your time and attention. Exit Kassandra. A dog skittles past, looks askance at the scatterings of fire, scorched earth, smoke-black sky, iron spears and their corpses. A boy, his mouth open as though to sing. Enter Kassandra. Here, a girl in a once white gown, but oh, below her waist, blood stain, rape stain, how it seeps through the fabric, how it spreads. A theme. Did you see that blasphemy? In my temple! My temple! Beside it. Ix? Isn't he one of yours? A theme. Just because I support the Greek team doesn't mean one of them can shit in mine. Beside it. You mean rape? A theme. Exasperated. Yes, rape. He raped Cassandra, who in my temple should have been. Beside him. So you're for the Greeks, but not this Greek? A theme. He defiled my temple. The annihilation of noons, not a question about the sun. Regardless of sun, in Troy, there is no light. I walk blindly. Is that my mother crying? The air is heavy with salt. A herald declares this, that. The annihilation of noons, not a question about the sun. Are my eyes open? On the altar, is that my sister's body? Perhaps the sun blazes. I am the hollow of a drum. I can feel a warmth over my hair, my arms, but if it's light, I might see my father's corpse. The annihilation of noons, not a question about the sun. A soldier leads me away, but not toward. Exit Kassandra. Enter Huckabee. Weeping finds its limit. The spent body convulses in a sob, but can expel only a hoarse, choking cry. I watched a Greek soldier, filthy with Trojan blood, hustle away my daughter as I strained to memorize her receding shape, her gait. At the same time, the litany of the dead, names day in my heavy head. Hector, Priam, Ephobus, Polyxene, Astyanax. Hector, Priam, Ephobus, Polyxene, Astyanax. Son, husband, son, daughter, grandson. With a shudder I woke to char stench and blood and oh, my own Kassandra gone. Exit Huckabee. Enter Kassandra, led by a Greek soldier. Wrists bound before her with rope, the decor of force, she. Into the Greek camp, men clustered around fires, men attired in armor, in mud, in corpse boon. Here a grinning soldier waves a dead man's shield. Copper hair unbound, gown trailing in dirt, she. Into an eye line above or between the men's heads, neither awake nor asleep, though walking. Lips barely parted to try to inhale without smell, she. Into the reek, an army of men, sweat and urine, excrement and blood, and cask after emptying cask of Trojan wine. Eyes open and unblinking, yet not quite seeing, she, among swords, spears, shields, chariots, missiles, breastplates, whips, javelins, helmets, greaves. The drinking, drunken men turn to watch her drift by. The calm, the burn of the Holocaust, the annihilation of noon, the calm of the disaster. In the annihilation of noon, only yesterday a virgin in the flaming smoke-black city. The city, her city, out of the horse, the Greek soldiers, homes in the ransack, in the pillage, in the burn, people, her people, amok. Oh, bodies. Many, so many, blood-wet, pierced, stabbed, hacked, hewn. Here a boy screeches, his left arm barely. Here a woman flails as a soldier, while Kassandra struggles too. And just days ago, she fanned gleaming hair over breasts, shoulders, back with a thrill, the easy certainty. How she paired her body with mine. The soldier raises the tent's flap, ushers her in. A wooden table, a couple stools, some pots, and a bed wide enough for two. She sits on a stool to wait, to breathe. A young woman, eyes kohl-rimmed, carries in a large pot, a rough cloth. The bearer surveys the captive. So you're the crazy hottie? Unbinds Kassandra's wrists. Clean yourself up. A young man, a wisper of hair on his pointed chin, bears a broad wooden platter, wafting garlic, olive oil. This is not slave scrap. Fresh fish cooked with olives, flatbreads, cheese, figs, a kylix of wine, and a jug more besides. As he lowers the platter onto the table, each alone wonders when Agamemnon will come to claim her. To drink the black wine or abstain, to succumb to Agamemnon or struggle, to pretend or not. Kassandra dreams. At the feast, servants refill each guest's kylix with wine, bring platters again and again, serve to each and every. The food perfumes the air, heady with garlic, olive oil, fish. Here a woman giggles at a man's bawdy joke, and here a man slides his finger into a woman's mouth. By now, Mentor should have called me away, but where is she? A man sidles close, his breath hot, his fingers climbing my thigh, and I try to push back, but somehow we are now alone and he is everywhere, his arms circling, his breath, his body closing, and when I open my mouth to scream, he puts his lips on mine and he swallows my voice. Soldier 1. What were those noises from Agamemnon's tent last night? Soldier 2 guffaws. You know what those noises were. Soldier 1. For a long time, I could only hear his voice. Soldier 2. Yeah, well. Soldier 1. Then I heard a gull shriek, a horse's bray, a single bird chirping. Soldier 2. Yeah, well. Soldier 1. The make-do altar bears an ox, splayed and butchered to appease Athene for Ajax's impiety. The attendant soldiers mutter, wonder who, in the sack of Troy, seeing the frantic beauty alone in the temple, wouldn't have. They watch Agamemnon as red sprays with each whack of his axe, as though the more blood he discharges, the purer Kassandra becomes. Poseidon, well? Athene, well, what? Poseidon, are you happy? The Greeks gave you a sacrifice, and now? Athene, Agamemnon gave me a sacrifice. Poseidon, he slaughtered, and boy did he slaughter, an ox for you to make up for the Athene. Impiety, Poseidon, rape of Kassandra. Now can they go home? Athene shrugs. Well. Onto the ship, a soldier carries over one shoulder a long roll of fabric, a thickly woven carpet of Tyrian purple, once Priam's own. A corner of the rug falls away to reveal a woman, red hair awry, face streaked with dirt and tears. Her lips move, but there is no sound. Tucked against the well-caulked wood of the hull, she sucks her thumb, sees her father leaning in to tickle under her chin, while the sweat-streaked men, rowing, snicker. The past at Ready Harbor. Kassandra dreams. The horse's hooves pounding the earth create dust clouds rising and falling. The pounding of hooves, whirring wheels of the chariot, whistle and crack of whip. Over it all, Achilles exults. The chariot drags my brother's body. I lean on over the city wall. I heard to discern, confirm he is dead and not still alive now. As I lean on the width of wall to see, a gust of wind, a tremor, a fall, and my wrists are rope bound to the chariot. My body dragged at speed over the stony soil. I scream and between the hull and the wine casks, Kassandra nestles, a murmuring pool of flesh, a fruit left to ripen. She does not so much wake as suffer moments of faint visibility in a relentless fog. So when she rouses and feels need, there is a pot to sit on. There are grapes, flatbread, a cup of water. She pisses or eats and descends again. A fetal half-lie, fog and doze. A Trojan, a vaguely familiar face. Kassandra wakes to its searching. She stirs and the girl scurries to a distance. A kitchen mouse, now a ship on the wide, lurching sea. Kassandra recognizes a slave from the palace. And for a second, Kassandra is again, voila, princess. Now a man's bark, the shatter of wave against hull, and Kassandra extends her arms, palms up. Come, little mouse. Come for my little all. Enter Xanthe. My first day at the palace, Etter took me to clean the dining hall, and I gaped at the large tapestry along one wall, a vehement battle between us Trojans and I knew not who. Armen's armor gleamed in the light. Athene and Apollo above shone upon them. Armen, clean, fierce, there's blood and mud amid so much cowering. I reached a couple warrior's cheek, met her, slapped my hand away. She consigned me to the kitchen, but it was still beauty. The first time I sniffed cinnamon, sprinkled salt, held a mouthful of Priam's best wine on my tongue. The times I slipped away for beauty on the eyes, tapestry or marble column or a fine gown that floated on its own breeze. When I first saw her, I supposed I dreamed. And even then she was wine and salt and cinnamon and I knew not what, but more. Of all stars, the most beautiful. Aboard ship, Agamemnon, all muscle and curling black hair, he beckoned, and I, eyes down, trembled. He charged me to look after the girl asleep by the wine casks. Asleep? Midday? Agamemnon spat, pivoted. I hurried to discover this day sleeper. The woman's form coiled, its layered silk gown stained and askew, her shoulder bare and bruised. I knew by the hair, a red only hers. She muttered, shuddered, shook. Tenderly I reached. So friable she seemed, to see her hard, bright stare. Behind a makeshift curtain, Xanthi strokes my skin with sea-wet cloth until I'm clean as salt. When from the partition we emerge, Agamemnon's lusty gaze and nod strike, and I avert my eyes to keep from stumbling, vomiting, howling. Hidden, I reach to the ache between. Body? Whose body? Cup the warm furrow. In the palace, I saw myself in so many mirrors. Now my hand's a bandage or a weak lock. Aboard ship, the only mirrors are men's eyes. When I dream, his face lowers, breath hot and rank, garlic and black wine. I turn my head, his coarse beard scrapes my cheek. He twists, leans heavy, cleaves my legs, and there now he is, inside and thrusting to break me at the source. Morning, I wake to the self-same face, a few yards away as he seems to counsel a boy. Rest a hand on the young one's shoulder, a fatherly gesture. And I remember, yes, he is also a father. In the thrall of the impossible real, enter Apollo and other god. Other god. Ah, she was your girl, wasn't she? Apollo shrugs. A priestess in one of my temples. Other god, elbowing Apollo. Come on, I heard it was more than that. Apollo. She is exquisite. Other god. That's what I'm saying. I bet those lips taste of cherries. Apollo winks. Night. Sky, black but 4. Night. A ship of stinking, snoring men. Night. Into our makeshift bed, he. Dream. Xanthi and I leap overboard, rise as dolphins. Dream. I scream and I scream, but there is no dream. Sleep. I roll forward so his hand slides off my hip. Sleep. Just one tear slides. Sleep. Xanthi lies near, eyes alert, so I. Where? In night's friable manner. Lithe little Xanthi keeps post. Does she sleep? Brings a pot, lies askance in the morning. Pours it overboard and brings flatbread, dried fruit, fresh water. Eat, she says, and more than shadow, indeed the musk of her breath over my afternoon rest, as she, little mouse, strokes my hair.